Dispatcher called me at 4:37 in the morning, his voice rough with the kind of fatigue that only comes from a graveyard shift in a Dallas trucking office. The reefer unit on my rig had thrown a code somewhere outside Amarillo, and the company wanted me to deadhead back to Fort Worth instead of pushing through to Phoenix. 5 days early. I should have felt cheated. I'd been counting on that Phoenix run to clear the property tax bill that was due on the 15th. Instead, I just sat there in the cab listening to the diesel idle, and what I felt was something I couldn't name. Relief, maybe. Or dread. Sometimes those two feel exactly the same. I'd been on the road 11 days. My boy Owen would have just finished his second week of what my wife had been calling the program. She had a way of saying it that made it sound official, like something a doctor would prescribe. The Cypress Grove Behavioral Wellness Initiative. I remember the first time she said the full name to me, sitting at our kitchen table with a folder full of pamphlets she'd printed off the church website. Owen had just turned 12. He'd had a meltdown at school over a fluorescent light that was buzzing in the cafeteria, and the principal had called my wife in, and that was the last straw, she said. She kept using that phrase, the last straw. Owen has autism. Mild, the doctor said when he was 4. High functioning, they used to say before they stopped using that word. He's the kind of kid who memorized every county in Texas before he could ride a bike. He builds these elaborate cardboard cities on the floor of his bedroom, complete with little stoplights made out of bottle caps and red marker. When his mother passed 8 years ago, an aneurysm at 31 years old that nobody saw coming, Owen was 4 and he didn't cry. He just sat on the floor and rebuilt the same building over and over until I finally had to take the cardboard away because his hands were bleeding from the box cutter. I married my second wife 3 years ago. I'd met her at a grief support group at the Methodist Church on Camp Bowie. She'd lost her brother. She seemed kind. She was patient with Owen at first, in that careful way some people are patient with a foreign language they're trying to learn. But somewhere around year 2, the patience started to wear thin, and she started using words like discipline and structure and boundaries the way other women might use words like love or home. The drive from Amarillo to Fort Worth is about 5.5 hours if you push it. I didn't push it. I stopped at a Love's outside Wichita Falls and ate a sausage biscuit and drank coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since the Reagan administration. I called the house from the parking lot. No answer. I called my wife's cell, straight to voicemail. I told myself she was probably at her Tuesday morning Bible study. I told myself a lot of things on that drive. I pulled into our driveway in River Oaks just before noon. The lawn was mowed sharper than I'd ever cut it. The hedges were trimmed in those tight little balls she liked. The garden gnome that Owen had glued sequins onto for some art project, the one he'd named Mr. Pickles, was gone. That's the detail that stuck with me later. That damn gnome. It had been on the front porch step for 2 years. The house was quiet in a way that felt staged. You know how a house sounds when people are gone for a vacation, and you know how it sounds when nobody actually lives in it anymore. This was the second kind. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged in a perfect descending size order. The remote controls were lined up on the coffee table like instruments before a surgery. I walked down the hallway to Owen's room and stopped at the door for a long moment before I opened it. His cardboard city was gone. The shelves where he kept his Lego sets, all of them organized by color and theme, were empty. His bedspread, the one with the constellations on it that he'd picked out himself when he was 9, had been replaced with a plain white quilt I didn't recognize. The bookcase had been cleared except for 3 books, all of them with titles like Boys Becoming Men and Discipline and Discipleship. The framed picture of his mother that I'd put on his nightstand the day after the funeral, the only picture I had of her holding him as a baby, was missing. I sat down on the edge of his bed, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt since the day they called me from the hospital about his mom. A cold spot, a sinking, quiet thing. My phone rang. It was her. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Sweetheart, I just got home from the women's prayer group, and I saw the truck in the driveway. Her voice had that careful, brittle cheerfulness she used when she was performing for an audience. Why didn't you tell me you were coming home early? Where's Owen? There was a pause that lasted about half a second too long. He's at the wellness program, the one we discussed. Pastor Halverson's summer initiative, you remember, honey? We talked about this in May. You said it was a day program. You said he'd be home every night. Well, the residential component started 2 weeks ago. It's been such a blessing. Pastor Halverson says he's making real progress with the boys out there. They have him on a structured routine. He's eating at regular times. He's not having the episodes anymore. Where is it? I wasn't asking. She tried to redirect. She tried to talk about how I was always gone, how I didn't understand what it was like trying to manage Owen's behaviors, how this had been her decision because somebody had to make it. I let her talk. I walked into the kitchen while she was talking, and I opened the drawer where we kept the household papers. And there were no folders for the program, no paperwork, nothing, just bills. Where is it? She gave me an address, out near Mineral Wells, about an hour and 10 minutes west, off a county road I'd never driven. She was still talking when I hung up the phone. I left the front door open and I got back in my truck. The land out past Weatherford turns flat and scrubby, with mesquite trees clawing up out of the rocky soil and the sky going wide and pale in that particular Texas way that always made me feel small when I was a boy. I followed the GPS down a farm-to-market road, then onto a county road, then onto a gravel drive that wound between two pastures with cattle that looked thin and uninterested. After about a mile and a half, I came up over a small rise and I saw the place. It wasn't a church camp. It wasn't even a camp. It was an old chicken barn, the long industrial kind, sitting on about 40 acres of cleared land with a smaller cinder block building behind it and a chain link fence around the perimeter. There was a hand-painted sign at the entrance that read, C.Y. Prest, Groove Wilderness Ranch in cheerful blue letters. Below it, in smaller print, Where Boys Find Their Path. There were no other cars in the lot. Just a single white pickup truck and a 15-passenger van with the windows tinted darker than the law allowed. I parked. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds, and then I heard it. A sewing machine. The unmistakable rapid clatter of an industrial sewing machine coming from inside the chicken barn. And then another one. And then another. A whole row of them. I got out of the truck. The door of the cinder block building opened, and a man came out. He was somewhere in his 50s, lean, with the kind of leathered skin that comes from too many years staring into a horizon. He wore khaki pants and a polo shirt with a small embroidered cross over the heart. He smiled at me with too many teeth. You must be lost, friend. This is private property. I'm here for my son, Owen. The smile didn't change, but something behind it did. I'm afraid we don't allow drop-in visits. Our program requires a controlled environment. You'd need to schedule with Pastor Halverson, and I can assure you that will be after the 3rd-week milestone. I'm his father. I'm sure you are. But the boy's mother has signed legal guardianship for the duration of the program. His mother is dead. His face did something then. A flicker. I'd hit a nerve he hadn't expected to be there. I started walking past him. He stepped in front of me and put a hand on my chest. I drove my forearm up under his and shoved him sideways into the gravel. I'm 51 years old, and I've spent 33 years strapping down freight and changing trailer tires on the side of interstates. He went down harder than he expected. I walked around the corner of the cinder block building, and I saw the inside of the chicken barn through an open loading door. And I want to tell you exactly what I saw, because I don't ever want to forget it, and I don't want anyone listening to this to forget it either. There were boys, maybe 20 of them, ages I'd guess, from 10 to 15. They were sitting on metal folding chairs at long tables, and on those tables were industrial sewing machines, and the boys were sewing. Pieces of cheap synthetic fabric, the kind they make those polyester athletic shirts out of, in stacks beside each station. The barn was easily 110 degrees inside, maybe hotter. There were industrial fans blowing, but they were just pushing the heat around. The boys wore matching gray t-shirts, soaked through with sweat. Most of them had their heads down. None of them were talking. There was a man standing at the end of one row with a clipboard and what looked like a thin wooden dowel. And in the 3rd row, second from the end, was my son. Owen was hunched over a machine. His glasses were sliding down his nose because of the sweat. His hair, which he keeps short because he doesn't like the feeling of it on his neck, had grown out into a ragged mop. His hands were moving, but slower than the other boys, and I could see even from where I stood that they were wrapped in something. Strips of fabric, like makeshift bandages. There was a dark stain on the right one. I don't remember crossing the floor. I remember the man with the clipboard turning toward me, and I remember his mouth opening, and I remember him getting his hand on my shoulder, and I remember pivoting and putting my elbow into his rib cage hard enough that he folded. The boys looked up. All of them. Every single face turned toward me, and I will carry those faces with me until the day I die. They didn't look afraid of me. They looked afraid of what would happen to them after I left. Owen saw me last. He'd been concentrating on his machine. When he finally looked up, his face went through 3 different expressions in the span of a second, and the last one was the one that broke me. He looked guilty. "Daddy?" His voice was small and uncertain. "Daddy, you're not supposed to be here. They said if anyone came, it would be a test." I went to my knees beside his chair and I pulled him into my arms, and he flinched at first, the way he does when touch is unexpected, but then he melted into me and he started shaking, and I felt his bandaged hands come up and grip the back of my shirt. "Daddy, Mama said you didn't want to come back. She said you couldn't handle me anymore. She said the trucking company let you stay out longer because you asked them to. Pastor Halverson said this was where boys like me go when their fathers give up. He said if I worked hard enough, I could earn my way back to a family someday. I want you to understand. I had not cried in front of my son since the day his mother died, and I had not cried in front of any other human being for years before that. But I cried in that chicken barn in Parker County, Texas, with my son's bandaged hands clutching the back of my shirt, and I didn't try to stop it. Bud, listen to me. Listen. None of that is true. None of it. I love you more than anything in this whole world. I would never leave you. Mama lied. Mama was wrong. I am here. I'm right here." He nodded against my chest, but he didn't let go. A boy at the next station, smaller than Owen, maybe 10 years old, with red hair and a sunburn across the bridge of his nose, leaned across his machine and whispered, Mister, can you call my dad too? My dad's name is Brennan. He works at a tire shop in Cleburne. Please." I will never not hear that little boy's voice. I picked Owen up. He was light. He'd lost weight, real weight, in 2 weeks. I started walking toward the loading door. The man with the clipboard was on a radio. The man from outside, the one I'd put down in the gravel, came around the corner with 2 more men behind him, and one of them was holding what looked like a riot baton. I set Owen down behind me, and I told him to stay still. I'm not a fighter by nature. I've thrown maybe 3 real punches in my whole life, but I have a kind of stillness in me that I inherited from my father, who was a Marine, and when I told those 3 men to back off, 2 of them did. The third one, the youngest, came at me with the baton, and I caught his wrist and twisted it in a way I'd seen on a self-defense video Owen and I had watched together because he was anxious about middle school, and the baton clattered onto the concrete. The young one looked at his wrist like it had betrayed him. "Sir," a new voice. Older, calmer. I turned and there was a man in his 60s standing in the loading door. White hair combed back, a sport coat over a button-down despite the heat. He was carrying a tablet. "Sir, my name is Pastor Roy Halverson. I am the director of this ministry. I can see we have a misunderstanding here, and I would very much like to resolve it without involving law enforcement. Call them, right now. Call them." He smiled the kind of smile that men like him have practiced in mirrors. "Friend, I think you'll find that the local sheriff's department is well aware of our work here. They consider us a vital community resource. The boys you see here are troubled. Many of them have nowhere else to go. Their families have entrusted them to us because we get results. Your son's mother signed a comprehensive guardianship agreement. We have the documentation. If you remove him from this property, you will be in violation of a binding legal contract. She's not his mother." He tilted his head. "Stepmother, then. Same legal authority during your absence. She doesn't have legal authority over him. I have sole custody. His biological mother passed 8 years ago. I never gave anyone power of attorney." The pastor's face did the same thing the first man's had done. The flicker, the recalculation. "I'm sure that's a misunderstanding we can work through. But not today. Today you're trespassing on private property. You've assaulted 3 of my staff, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to call. Call them. I'm begging you. Call them." I had my phone out. I was already calling 911 myself. I told the operator everything. I gave them the address. I told them there were 20 children in an unventilated barn working sewing machines in dangerous heat. I told them my son had bandaged hands. I told them I had reason to believe these children were being held against their will and that one had begged me to call his father. The operator told me to stay on the line. I did. I sat down on the concrete with my son in my lap and I held the phone to my ear and I waited. It took the Parker County Sheriff's Department 22 minutes to arrive. The first car was driven by a deputy who couldn't have been more than 30 years old. Heavy-set, with a shaved head and a copper-colored beard. His name tag said Whitley. He got out of his car slow and he looked at the scene. Me on the concrete with Owen. Pastor Halverson trying to explain himself. The man with the bruised ribs. The boys watching from the loading door because they'd come outside, all of them, and they were standing in a clump in the gravel like a herd of deer that didn't quite know what to do. Deputy Whitley looked at the boys for a long time. He looked at Owen's bandaged hands. He looked at the sewing machines visible through the open door. He keyed his radio and he said, very quietly, I'm going to need everybody available, and I'm going to need CPS, and I'm going to need the captain. What happened over the next 6 hours has been written about in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the Texas Tribune, and eventually the New York Times. 41 boys were removed from the Cypress Grove Wellness Ranch that afternoon, and the next morning, after deputies executed a search warrant on the dormitory building behind the chicken barn. The dormitory had no air conditioning and the windows had been bolted shut. The boys slept on plastic gym mats on the floor. They were fed 2 meals a day, the first at 5:30 in the morning and the second at 7 in the evening. They worked from 6:30 in the morning until 6:30 at night with a single 30-minute break for lunch and water. The garments they sewed were sold to a wholesale distributor in Dallas that supplied a handful of regional discount clothing chains and, through a shell company, 2 name-brand fast fashion retailers I won't name here because the lawsuits are still ongoing. Pastor Roy Halverson was arrested at 9047 that night. He was charged with 21 counts of human trafficking, 41 counts of unlawful restraint of a minor, and various counts of fraud, child endangerment, and labor violations. His staff, 8 men and 3 women, were arrested over the following week. My wife was arrested in our kitchen the next morning at 6:14 while she was making coffee. She cried. She said she didn't know. She said the pastor had told her the program was therapeutic, that the boys did light gardening and Bible study, that the structure was what Owen needed. She showed the deputies the pamphlet. The pamphlet was real. The pamphlet was a lie. She also collected, it turned out, a $5,000 referral fee for placing Owen in the program. I found that out 3 months later in a forensic accounting report attached to a court filing. I don't tell that part with much feeling anymore. There isn't much feeling left to give it. The trial ran 14 months. Halverson got 62 years in federal prison, no parole. His staff got sentences ranging from 12 to 30 years. My wife took a plea deal and got 18 years on a trafficking conspiracy charge. During allocution, she said something I think about more than I want to. She said when she was a teenager, her own mother had sent her to a different program in a different state run by different people, but the same kind of place. She'd sewed too. She said she thought it had made her stronger. She said she thought it would do the same for Owen. I don't believe her. But I think she believed herself. Sometimes I think that's worse. The other boys went home. Most of them. 3 were already wards of the state and went into emergency foster placement. 1, the little redhead who had asked me to call his dad in Cleburne, went home to his father, who really did work at a tire shop, and who really had been told by the program that his son needed 3 months of no-contact reset to break his bad behaviors. That father drove to my house 6 weeks after the rescue and sat on my porch for 2 hours. We didn't talk much. He just wanted to look at me, to see the man who had walked into the barn. I understood. I let him sit. Owen didn't speak for almost a month. Not to me, not to his therapist, not to anyone. He didn't build anything. He didn't draw. He sat on the floor of his room with his back against his bed and he stared at the wall. The doctor said this was a regression, that it was common in trauma cases that I had to be patient. I quit driving long haul, took a local route with the same company, hauling between distribution centers in the Metroplex, home every night by 7. We ate dinner together every single evening, even when he wouldn't talk, even when he wouldn't look at me. I just kept being there. The thing that finally broke through was a Lego set. A specific one. The Saturn V rocket, the big one with all the stages. I bought it on a Saturday morning impulse at the Target on Hulen Street, and I put it on his desk without saying anything. I didn't push. I didn't suggest. I just left it there. 3 days later, I came home from work and he was sitting at the desk and the box was open and the first stage was assembled. He looked up at me and he said, "Dad, I think the instructions are wrong on step 47. It was the first sentence he'd spoken in 28 days. I said, "Let's take a look." We sat there for 2 hours and we figured out that the instructions weren't wrong. He'd just been so eager he put a piece in backwards, and when we corrected it he laughed. A real laugh. Quiet but real. My boy laughed. It took 2 more years before he was anything close to himself again. The nightmares went on for longer than that. Some nights I'd hear him crying out from his room, and I'd go in, and he'd be sweating through his shirt and shaking, and he'd ask me to check the windows. Always the windows. Make sure the windows weren't bolted shut. I always checked. I always told him they opened. Sometimes I opened one to prove it, even in the middle of January, and we'd sit there for a few minutes feeling the cold air come in, and that would be enough. He could go back to sleep. When he was 14, his middle school had a science fair. He built a city, a whole working city, out of recycled cardboard and LED lights and bottle caps, just like he used to before any of this happened, but bigger, more elaborate. Streets that lit up in sequence. A traffic system that actually worked. He called it Free City, the plaque said. A city where everyone goes home at the end of the day. He won first place. The judge, a retired engineer from Lockheed, asked him what inspired the name, and Owen looked at me from across the gymnasium, and then he looked back at the judge and he said, "I just wanted to build a place where nobody could lock the doors." I had to step out into the hallway for that one. He's 17 now. He's applying to engineering programs, mostly state schools, and Texas A&M is his first choice because they have the best aerospace department within driving distance, and he wants to come home on weekends, even though he'd never say that out loud. He's 6 inches taller than me. His hands healed clean, no permanent damage, though there's a scar on the right one, shaped a little like a checkmark that he won't talk about. I spent the last 4 years volunteering with a group out of Austin that works on troubled teen industry reform. We go to legislative hearings. We talk to families. We tell them what to look for. We tell them that any program that won't let you visit unannounced is hiding something, that any program that requires no contact periods is a red flag, that any program that uses Bible verses to justify physical labor by minors is a fraud and a criminal enterprise no matter what the sign on the gate says. There's a bill in the Texas legislature right now, the Owen Act, that would require licensing and quarterly inspections of every residential youth program in the state. Owen testified for it last spring. He was nervous beforehand. He paced in the hallway of the Capitol for almost an hour. When he finally got up there, he spoke for 4 minutes, and when he was done, 2 state senators were wiping their eyes. The thing he said that I think about most was near the end. He said, "I want to tell every kid who is in a place like that right now that your dad or your mom is looking for you. Maybe they don't know yet, but they're looking. And if they don't come, then a stranger will. Because I'm not the only one. There are a lot of us now. We grew up, and we're looking too." We drove past the property on Highway 281 last summer on our way to a baseball game in Granbury. The chicken barn is gone. The state seized the land in the civil judgment, and a Methodist conference bought it at auction and tore down everything that was on it. They planted bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush across the whole 40 acres. Wildflowers, the way that part of Texas used to look before anyone built anything on it. Owen asked me to pull over. I did. We stood at the fence and we looked at the flowers, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached over and he took my hand, which is a thing he doesn't do much anymore, being 17, and he held it. "Dad." "Yeah, bud. Thank you for coming home early that day." I couldn't talk. I just squeezed his hand. "And Dad?" "Yeah. Thanks for being my dad in the first place." That's the bigger one. The coming home part is just because you were already the other thing. I'm a 55-year-old trucker from Fort Worth, Texas. I am not a man who has the words for moments like that. I never have been. So I just held my son's hand, and I looked at the bluebonnets, and I tried to memorize the way the light was hitting them, because I knew this was one of the moments I'd want to come back to later, when I was old, when he was grown and gone and living his own life somewhere. There's a thing I want to say before I close this out, because every time I tell this story, I get the same questions, and they're always from parents, and the questions are always some version of, how did I not see it? Here's what I tell them. You are not stupid for trusting the people you married. You are not a bad parent for being away at work. You are not foolish for believing that someone who quotes scripture would not hurt a child. The people who run these places count on the fact that you are decent. They count on the fact that decent people assume other people are decent too. That's the engine of the whole operation. What I tell you instead is this. Trust the small things. The throw pillows arranged too neatly. The garden gnome that suddenly disappears. The bedspread you don't recognize. The bookshelf that's been edited. The picture of the dead mother that's been removed from the nightstand. These are not coincidences. These are the fingerprints of someone trying to erase a child to make room for the version of him that fits their plan. If you see those fingerprints, you go look. You drive out to the address. You walk into the building. You don't wait. You don't call ahead. You don't schedule a visit. You go. Because somewhere out there, there's a kid sitting at a sewing machine, or in a cotton field, or in a wilderness camp, or in some other quiet hell that doesn't have a name yet, and he is waiting for someone to come for him. And he's been told no one will. And he's starting to believe it. Don't let him believe it. Go. I've thought about that drive home from Amarillo 1,000 times since. 5 days early, a busted reefer unit on a freight load nobody else wanted to haul. If that compressor had held for another 12 hours, I'd have been somewhere outside Albuquerque when the worst of it happened. And Owen would have been at that sewing machine for another month. And the boy he was when I found him might never have come back. I don't believe in fate the way some folks do. I believe in machines that break down at the right time, and in fathers who learn to listen to the small noises before the loud ones, and in the quiet way that life sometimes gives you a second chance you didn't know you needed. What I learned out there in that chicken barn in Parker County is that evil almost never shows up wearing a costume. It shows up in a polo shirt with a small embroidered cross. It shows up holding a tablet and quoting scripture and offering you structure for your difficult child. It counts on the fact that you are tired. It counts on the fact that you have been working too many hours. It counts on the fact that you trust your wife and that she trusts her pastor and that decent people assume other decent people are telling the truth. The thing I want my son to carry forward, and the thing I want anyone listening to carry forward, is that doing right by the people you love is not a feeling. It is a discipline. It is the long, unglamorous practice of showing up, of asking the second question after they've answered the first, of driving the extra hour when something feels off, even when you're tired, even when you're not sure, even when the polite voice in your head tells you not to make a scene. Owen's hands healed. The scar on his right one is shaped a little like a check mark, and sometimes when he's working on a Lego build, I catch him rubbing it absent-mindedly, and I have to look away. But the bigger healing was the one I didn't see for a long time. It was him learning slowly, day by day, that the world has cruel people in it and also has people who will come for you. That both things are true. That the second kind exist and that he is allowed to look for them and that he is allowed to become one of them himself. He testified at the state capitol last spring. He told a room full of senators that somebody is looking for every kid in a place like that, even if those kids don't know it yet. I sat in the gallery and I watched my boy speak, and I thought about the man I was the morning that dispatcher called. Tired, half-broken, counting dollars in my head, almost a stranger to the child I'd raised. And I understood, finally, what it had cost me to be that man, and what it had nearly cost him. You don't get those years back. You only get the ones in front of you. So you go home. You ask the second question. You drive the extra hour. You do not look away.